The Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute is driving bold policy solutions for a resilient Canadian agri-food system and building a stronger future for Canadian agriculture. Visit capi-icpa.com to discover how. Welcome to the Real Agri-Studies podcast, the show where farmer voices meet the power of data. Here we break down the latest research from producers, dig into the trends shaping agriculture, and turn insights into action. Now here are your hosts, Sean Haney and Justin Funk.
Sean Haney and Justin Funk here with RealAgristudies, and we're going to run through right now what farmers said across Canada when it comes to some trade issues. And of course, trade is top of mind for a lot of people that are in the trade export commodities. And Justin, we heard some interesting things. We led off our survey with that question all about EV tariffs, and we'll get to that in a second. But we do appreciate very much all of the farmers and ranchers that stepped up and answered the October Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. If you missed our video going through some of those index numbers, I encourage you to check that out at RealAgriculture.com or on our YouTube channel. But Justin, let's get into trade.
Yep, you bet. So this is actually what we led off the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index survey with. And the very first question was related to the EV tariffs. So the question was, should the Canadian government lift tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles? And there was a pretty overwhelming response, leaning one way on this. 68% said yes, 13% said no, and then there was a group that was either indifferent or not sure, just either didn't have an opinion or maybe couldn't come up with an opinion on this one. But I would say that one is pretty convincing.
Yeah, I'd run this number by Kelvin from Real Agriculture on Friday, and he's like, I'm actually surprised it's not higher than 68%. I think the indifferent kind of comes across a little bit of a, yeah, whatever. But the I'm not sure is, I think, in some ways I would argue that number, I'm surprised that number is not higher, because I read the I'm not sure as people are like, I don't know what we should do. If we lift those EV tariffs, do we make the U.S. mad? If we lift the tariffs, does China actually remove the tariffs they have on Canadian ag commodities? There's a lot of unknowns here, and so yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't know if we should do anything, and so I actually thought that number might be higher. 13% saying no, hold strong here. Kind of fascinating. This has been a controversial issue, talked about in a lot of coffee shops across the country.
Well, and speaking of that, there were various opinions based on where you were in the country. This is one where we look at the geographical responses to this question, and you can clearly see here there is a very different opinion on this question based on whether you are in the East or the West. And of course, West, in this case, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, and then the East is everything Ontario and eastward. So a lot more, I'm not sure, in the East. But clearly, definitively, the West thinks that these tariffs should be lifted.
Yeah, and I think these numbers do make sense. I will say, in avid followers of Real Agriculture have heard me say this before. We're connecting a lot of dots on these EV tariffs, right? So originally, just to the history lesson, they were put in place for Canada trying to work more closely with the Biden administration in terms of working against Chinese EVs coming into North America that are substantially cheaper than some of the vehicles that are being produced either in Canada or the U.S. And that hold has continued. Mexico has actually put EV tariffs on China as well for the same reasons. The premiers, if you want to look at Premier Ford or Premier Smith or Premier Moe, the premiers have made this about agriculture versus the auto sector for domestic political reasons. China applied the tariffs on ag commodities, not saying, hey, this is retaliation. They went through a whole bunch, this is anti-dumping, and there's a whole process here, and it's confusing for people to kind of steer through. But no surprise, 78% of people in the West saying lift the tariffs. Like, give us some hope here. I don't care if there's a guarantee or not on them lifting the egg, the canola tariffs or the pea tariffs. I just want to see those tariffs lifted because at least possibly it's a good chance. East, 48%. And I think we should understand why there's a difference here. It's not because those people in the East that are saying yes, or saying no at 20%. It's not that they don't care about agriculture, but they're more likely to have a family member, a friend that is in the auto sector, right? And these tariffs and this whole battle has been there's the Ontario auto sector is very, very much under threat, but definitely less people in the East committed to this. Let's lift these tariffs for sure.
The next series of questions focused on level of concern with various trading partners. And so we presented the respondents with a list of trading partners and then asked them to rate the degree of concern, everything from not concerned at all to extremely concerned. And what I want everybody to really pay attention to here are the green bars, even the lighter green that demonstrates here concern. And it's right there in front of us with the U.S., China, and India. Not to say there's not concern with some of the others, but these top three are really the top three for sure.
Yeah, and
Sorry, this just gives it in a mean. I'm just going to show this one here.
oh,
So
even easier.
yeah,
That's nice.
yeah. If the five gets extremely concerned, one is not concerned at all. So you can, I think, see it a little more clearly this way.
Yeah, and there's a lot more noise right now around the trading relationship with between Canada and three countries, US, China, and India. And remember, this intake was done prior to India putting, those or reapplying the tariff, a 30% tariff on Canadian peas again. So Canadian farmers, were kind of ahead of the game. They're smart here. They realized and saw that we should be concerned about trade with India, and India followed through on some of those concerns. So RealAgristudies Insights panel showing they're on top of these issues indeed. And with United States at 4.49 out of 5, so that's pretty high concern, Justin.
Mhm.
China at 4.48, they're virtually the same number. Canada caught in between both of these countries in several ways. And the U.S. is our largest trading partner. So there's reason for concern there. And some of the things that President Trump has said about Canada, the trading relationship, whether it's we don't need Canada or it's the 51st state sort of rhetoric back from earlier in the year. And the other largest economy in the world is China. And they haven't been very friendly to Canada either, even with Carney seeming to have a pretty positive meeting last week. Farmers want to see some outcome and some change to that relationship. So they are, I think, rightfully concerned.
Yeah. When we look at the geographical responses, we won't pay attention to any particular number here necessarily unless you want to point something out, Sean. But my conclusion here is, well, it's right there on the chart that there's a greater level of concern amongst all these trading partners in the West than there is in the East. Now, it's marginal in some cases, but if you eyeball those numbers, they're all higher on the left than they are on the right.
Yep, and Western Canadian agriculture a little bit more export oriented. So it's a little bit, I think that's probably what's driving a little bit of that is, and we should actually go back and look. We'll have to do that in the future. When we think about the biggest concerns that farmers had around the 2026 cropping year, was there east-west differences on trade being a part of that top three? We talked about that prior video, but I agree with you. Definitely farmers here showing greater concern amongst all the trade partners, west-east.
Yeah. Now, the next question looked at the future importance of these trading partners. And so we asked people to rate the relative importance, in the next 10 years or over the next 10 years. And here we used a 3-point scale. So just looking at more important, less important, or about the same level of importance. And this bounces around a lot, doesn't give us a very good look at it. So I'll demonstrate the means again here, where the closer to 3 we get, the more important that trading partner is perceived to be in the next 10 years. And, you can see that, all of them to a certain degree are going to be a little more important, if not about the same. But with at the top, Mexico, India, and then China sort of leading the way there.
Yeah, this is this fits into the narrative of people pushing Canada to diversify its trade reliance and being less reliant on the United States. India, it's interesting that Mexico now we're coming off a few in-person meetings and delegations from Canada going down to Mexico to reaffirm and strengthen some of that trading relationship inside that CUSMA USMCA agreement between Canada and Mexico. So there's clearly some optimism there. Can Mexico backfill potentially what's at risk with the U.S.? Probably not. Qualitatively off the top of my head, I would probably bet a little bit against that. But it's interesting that Canadian farmers and ranchers see the trading relationship with India and China more important going forward than the United States for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. By a significant margin. I mean, when you look at this across
quite a bit,
547 responses, that's a significant difference.
Yeah.
Now, this next chart I'm going to show, it's a little tedious to look at and understand, but I decided to do this. I like to play around with the data just to see if there's some interesting findings we can pull from some of the questions. And what I am looking at here is comparing the difference that exists between the level of concern with a trading partner and the relative importance of a trading partner in the next 10 years. And to do this, I took that 5-point scale from the level of concern and I consolidated it to a 3-point. So now it's either concerned, neutral, or not concerned. And then I subtracted one from the other to illustrate the gap. And so as you look at this, how you interpret it is, well, remember, the United States was considered to be a high level of concern right now, but what we just looked at is in the next 10 years decreased in terms of its level of importance. And so you see this negative differential. And I guess how you might interpret this is kind of where we feel we should be putting our focus. Yeah, I'm concerned, but now they're less important perhaps than some of these other options. Well, maybe we should be putting more effort in some of these options that I'm not concerned about, that are of greater importance in the next 10 years.
Yeah, and so there's a couple things I really want to hear from the audience on this. Okay, I think this is a very fascinating slide, and I guess my first reaction is economic disaster. Canada cannot afford to be less attentive to the U.S., China, and India than they already are. What I see in this chart is us, and there could be a little bit of a Canada searching for friends here. The trading arena globally has shifted. It's not what it was in the early 2000s. It is not stable. It doesn't seem very friendly. But if we look at the three highest ratings, Mexico, Japan, and Indonesia at the bottom, even the European Union slightly behind, all the positive ones, UK, EU, Mexico, Japan, and Indonesia. What do those reek of? Stability. People that'll be nice to us, right? And so, but do those, even if we had the greatest success as a country, we shot the lights out. We came through and we hit the maximum number of agricultural trade with all 5 of those areas. Would it make up the difference for those top 3 that are in the negative, the U.S., China, and India? I don't think so. I'm just spitballing here and ballparking it, but I doubt it. So this is the challenge the Canadian government has in terms of this diversification of Canadian trade. It's not fun right now to do business with the U.S. and China. It's ugly. It's messy. It's not what we want it to be, but it's the economic reality that we do need it. Mm. So this is a very fascinating slide to me. I think there's some sociological things that come out of this slide, which is asking a different question, but I think it tells a little bit of a deeper story that's at work for a lot of people.
I wonder how quickly people's responses to this could change based on what's going on around us. We need to ask this question maybe a little more frequently based on the speed at which things are happening and the magnitude of the changes we observe.
Yeah. Is my reaction there, does it make sense to you as far
I,
as like,
yeah, I think so. And I think we also have to keep in mind that this is just a look at the data. It doesn't necessarily tie those attitudes together. But when you do look at how people answer one question versus another, and to demonstrate those differences, it does paint a picture of what's going on out there and what's happening in people's minds as well.
yeah, yeah. Like I had a farm leader time that spent a lot of time in, around the world trying to talk about, the benefits of buying Canadian products. And I remember him saying, you know, comparing China and Japan, those are not the same thing,
Mhm.
right? Japan is a high quality stability. It's Canada's kind of customer. You know, we know what they want. They follow through when they say, like but there's just not a lot of those around right now. It's messy out there, and there's tariffs being thrown all over the place, not just the U.S., but I mentioned the India example earlier, and some of those situations are easy to rectify, and others are not because hey, all politics are domestic, and every country has a reason for doing the things that they're doing, whether we want them to or not as an export oriented economy. So this is again, really appreciate our Real Agri Studies Insights panel in answering these questions because I think it does really provide some clarity in the frustration that farmers have in regards to these up and down sort of trading relationships and the impact it has back to the farm gate,
Yeah.
right? That's the ultimate reality here.
Well, and that's actually a good segue to this last question. What we were looking at here, farmers have very little control over. This they do, though, and they might not necessarily want to make changes to how they do things. But we did ask the question, is there a willingness to change certain production practices in order to capture new markets or reduce trade risk? And what we're looking at here is that about half, is not quite half, but nearly half of Canadian farmers indicate a willingness to make the necessary changes. And just one point I want to make, we look at this regionally, we look at this, based on type of farm and stuff like that. Very, very little differences based on those types of demographics in terms of how people answer this question, which suggests this is much more of a personal. There's personal differences as to how people think that would indicate their willingness to make these sorts of changes.
Yeah, like we're only talking 13% of farmers really being against any sort of change
Right.
practice.
Yeah.
That's pretty low. That's pretty low. If we had done some bet 360s before we started, I might argue I think some people are going to think they're surprised by the willingness. So I think that's encouraging because I think you always need to be, ducking and weaving and, being flexible in your business plan and seeking out opportunities to try to deal with the current geopolitical climate. One of the questions I have here that we didn't answer is there probably is also a sliding scale here of the people that are, very willing or may or not be willing. They're willing, but they're not like extremely willing. Like extremely willing, they're go forward, green light. That 39% that's in the may or may not, let's just focus on them for a second. That's a rather big piece of the subset. I wonder if for that group of people, it's about how big is the premium or will somebody compensate me for the change in the practice?
Yeah.
So
it depends. And we should have it depends category with a comment on depends on what, really, if we want to get to the root of this. But I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. So I think there's an example where maybe we definitely learned something in comparison to what people maybe thought would be the answer. I think this is a really good slide, and it shows that Canadian farmers and ranchers are they're not as stuck in their ways as some people want to make them out to be. Maybe is a good way to wrap that up for sure. So thanks to everybody, appreciate it.
Yeah. So that wraps up our discussion on trade and tariffs and the questions that we looked at. So thank you everybody for sharing your thoughts and opinions in this intake. Again, this is a busy time of year that we did this towards the end of October, but be on the lookout for our next survey, which is going to be coming down the line before too long.
Absolutely. If you have any feedback, thoughts, questions, maybe you got a rant, maybe you want to talk to Justin and I about how maybe we missed on something, maybe filling in some of the gaps. We'd love to have your feedback, your thoughts. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can text or call that Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. If you're watching this video and maybe you aren't a part of the Real Agri-Studies Insights panel, it's also very easy and it's like super fast to be a part of it. All you got to do is go to RealAgristudies.com and click on the sign up there, and we'll take care of you for sure. Okay, Justin, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Sean.